Shalom and welcome back to another episode of Two Jews, 10 Opinions. I'm Ailee Shanes.
And I'm Levi D'Amato, and this is episode 1 of season 2.
Of Two Jews, 10 Opinions. It's a new semester. What does that mean, Levi? It means more guests. It means more topics. And it means more of Ailee Shanes and Levi D'Amato on the mic singing words of knowledge into your ears on the Two Jews, 10 Opinions podcast.
Yeah.
We have a really exciting guest today, Gil Hoffman. He's the executive director of Honest Reporting. It's a media watchdog and pro-Israel advocacy group. They are very active on social media, trying to post factual content about Israel and about the Israel-Palestine conflict and the war between Israel and Hamas. And they also have a website where they are calling out journalists who have ties to Hamas or who have biases connected to Hamas. So they're doing really amazing work, and they've been responsible for the firing of a lot of journalists around the world. So they're a very big organization, a very impactful organization as well.
Yeah. So we're recording this after we did the conversation, but I think it'll be a really interesting conversation for you guys. I definitely learned a lot, and it was interesting to hear about kind of like the behind the scenes things that are going on. So, yeah.
Well, first, before we get into that interview, let's just say hi to our listeners real quick.
Yeah.
Levi, tell us what you did this summer. Tell us about your internship.
Oh, yeah. I was working in the World Jewish Congress. It is basically an NGO, like diplomatic organization that represents the needs of Jewish communities around the world. So, they work a lot with the United Nations, with foreign governments and that sort of thing. And it was a really interesting experience. Got to meet a lot of really cool people. So, yeah, I'm really grateful for my experience.
I'm really glad you had that experience.
Thank
Shout
you.
out to Michal Cohen, my
yeah.
really, really close friend Yehuda Cohen's older sister. Hired Levi D'Amato. I take full credit. Just kidding.
She will be on the podcast.
Oh, yes.
At some point. Yeah,
that's great, Michal. We can't wait to have you on the podcast. What I did this summer, I interned in Tampa at the NPR station of the Tampa Bay area, WUSF. I was a general assignment reporter there, and I got to report on so many different things in the Tampa Bay area. Got to do some really fun features. So yeah, it was a great summer being there in a city that I really never been to so much before, and just learning about a whole new community. So yeah, I guess both great summers for both of us. Very productive.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
So with that, guys, we hope that you guys also had a really amazing summer. So you ready to get back right into this interview?
Yeah, and smash that subscribe button.
Smash that subscribe button.
I don't know why I just wanted to say that. But
well, if you're listening on YouTube, there is a subscribe button.
Yeah.
If you are listening on Spotify and Apple, please make sure to follow us because we are posting episodes every other week.
Yes, every other week. We're going to try to be very consistent with the uploads, honestly, because we have a lot of interesting people that we want to have on the podcast, and let's get into it.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I guess we wanted to just kind of start by kind of getting an introduction from you and understanding like how you got to this point. So I guess a good place to start would be at Northwestern. I read this op-ed that you wrote in the Jerusalem Post about looking at the campus now and back then and how it was not really politicized, but I still kind of want to know how you got the motivation to, because you moved to Israel when you were 22, right? And then you were a political correspondent for I think like 24 years, right? So what was it at college when you got that, or like what was your motivations pretty much?
I was raised in America by Israeli parents, made in America with all Israeli parts. We always cared very much about what was going on in Israel. I have a massive family here, thank God. And we always watch the news from Israel. And I wanted to be a part of it. I wanted to be a part of the history that's happening day in and day out over here. And so I decided to get a degree in journalism where I could really be a part of that. And I was raised in Lincolnwood, Illinois, a 20-minute drive away from Northwestern. I had never visited it until after I was accepted and deferred for a year and still didn't visit it. I only visited it a week before school started in order to find out where things were. And I did this tour, and everybody else on the tour was like considering applying. And I said, no, I'm here because I've accepted. And they're like, oh, that's good. You've been accepted a year before and whatever. No, no, I'm starting in a week. And be like, you must live really far and never got a chance. No, 15 minutes away. Um, just never really cared to. Um, I went to Northwestern to get a degree in journalism. It would be a practical degree that I could use here in Israel, that would allow me to be a part of the action over here. And I'm very thankful to my professors for teaching me a lot, and for getting me ready to be a journalist. But I wouldn't already back then, even though we had no politics on campus, and the only protests I ever remember were called Take Back the Night, where people would unite behind the message that rape is bad, which back then you could agree on. Here, unfortunately, there are anti-Israel people who justified rape. Even though I had that positive experience, I would have never, ever considered giving a penny to Northwestern, because we have a responsibility to build up a Jewish community, and any charity dollars need to go to Jewish and pro-Israel causes. And Northwestern had this ridiculous amount of money. They charged us, what at the time, $25,000 a year sounded like way too much. And I didn't understand my friends who decided to immediately give to Northwestern. I'm, in retrospect, really glad that I never gave them any money, because over time they adopted all kinds of policies that were very harmful to the Jews on campus. They took action against the wonderful Chabad Rabbi Dov Hillel Klein. They opened up a campus in Qatar, and now Northwestern's president, who is Jewish, made a fool of himself before Congress, made a fool of the campus, made a fool of every alumni there ever was, in justifying giving in to the pro-terrorism encampment that there was on the campus more than any other university president did. So no, I'm not a very proud wildcat right now, and but I'm very proud of Israel, and I'm very proud to be a Jew.
I'm curious about kind of when, starting your career and starting your journalism career in Israel, what kind of differences you've seen when it comes to journalism and media between the US and Israeli media, and kind of how each kind of country sees the other, or kind of compares to each other media wise.
Sure, Eliyahu, I've been doing this for a while, and I'm old enough to remember calling in a story on a payphone. Do you know what that even is?
Yeah.
Uh, they used to have these phones on the street that you would have to put money in order to make a call. And I remember going to news events and having to call in a story, like the olden days. I remember going to press conferences in the morning and having a deadline of 8 o'clock at night, and starting to write the story at 7:15 p.m. Nowadays, when you cover a press conference, you're live tweeting it the whole time. You're taking pictures for Instagram. Your story has to be in by the time the press conference is over, because SEO is what matters. It's gotten a lot harder to be a journalist. When it comes to the comparison between Israel and America, we try to be more America than America in Israel. In political reporting, we focus on the political attacks on each other. I wish we focused more on the issues. In America, I think, even though America has this reputation for being shallow around the world, which is a terrible stereotype that's never been true. America, your election campaigns are a lot more issue oriented. Your parties have to come up with actual political platforms, which our parties don't here. And you have actual debates between candidates. We haven't had a debate between every candidate running for prime minister of Israel since 1996.
Hmm.
And in that regard, America's doing it better. We used to be much more issue oriented over here before the American strategists came in. Used to be we had campaign ads that were 5 minutes long, where they would explain a particular policy. And then from the time that Netanyahu, when he was running in 96, brought in strategist Arthur Finkelstein from the United States and made his ads be a slogan repeated every 7 seconds until it gets in your head and can't get out of it, and nothing else. That changed politics here for the worst forever.
Wow. That's really interesting. I mean, because, all we hear is, especially from politicians in America is, fake news in the media, and there's so much criticism with, American media, and it's really interesting to see that that's actually something that America is doing better in politics, at least, is kind of focusing more on policy and stuff like that, because there's just so much criticism with American politics and media right now, and it's just that's a very interesting perspective on that.
And you were getting at the end there to how Israel looks at America and how America looks at Israel when it comes to the media. There are a lot of misconceptions on both sides. That's led to a lot of people making wrong decisions. Right now, streets of Jerusalem are empty. It's a Thursday night. They're supposed to be packed. It's a weekend here now. And there's so few tourists here in August that it's very sad that they're not coming. They think wrongly that it's unsafe. There are areas in northern Israel that have been evacuated because they're unsafe. Southern Israel is completely safe. The Hamas have lost 90% of their rockets, most by using them to try to murder Jews. But you can go other than northern Israel anywhere in this country and be completely safe, much safer than you'd be in major cities in the United States. So the Americans are getting their news wrong about what's going on here, and vice versa. 2/3 of Israelis, according to recent polls, are afraid to visit America. Well, there are places you shouldn't go in America, but there are plenty of places that are totally fine. And I think that it's amusing to see the misconceptions go back and forth, and I blame it on the media.
Going off kind of the media and like how it shows Israel, I guess you've definitely been paying attention to the American media for a while. So like in terms of the spotlight that is kind of put on Israel, like when you look right now at the conflicts going on around the world, it's very clear that like I just read an article about Sudan, and that was the first time I've seen something about that in a while, and it's a horrific war. So I guess why does the American media, in your opinion, put such a spotlight on Israel? And how long has that kind of been a trend? Like, did you see that when you were growing up, or has it gotten worse lately?
It's been a trend since the days of the Bible that the world's attention has been on what's going on in Jerusalem. The amount of ordinary citizens murdered in Syria without the world caring because it's Arabs killing Arabs. The amount of people being killed by Muslims in Bangladesh who are Hindu. You mentioned Sudan, which is a place people need to know more about what's going there. It's horrible. The world has given more humanitarian aid to Gaza than anywhere else, which would be fine if the aid actually helped the Gazan people. But no, it went underground to be used by the Hamas to try to kill as many Israelis as possible. The countries and people around the world that gave aid to Gazans should feel horrible that they didn't help the people. Their money went to murder and rape and kidnap. And so, yes, the focus is always going to be on what's going on in Israel, even if Israel will do as the professors from West Point say, more to minimize civilian harm than any army in the history of mankind in war, certainly in urban warfare. The world will still say Israel's doing too much in defending itself. And anything that Israel does makes big headlines around the world. Why, you asked? Because there are plenty of Christians and Muslims around the world that care about what's going on here, billions of them. There aren't too many Jews in the world, but we tend to be out in the open and leaders. And so what happens with the Jewish people is relevant to the world. And that is a blessing and a curse.
When was the first time that you kind of realized this bias in the media and this disproportionate spotlight on Israel? And what was kind of the catalyst for you in trying to combat that?
Honest reporting has been around since 2001 during the Second Intifada, when there was a picture in the New York Times of a young man who was bloodied with a menacing looking Israeli soldier hovering over him. And the caption said that there was a Palestinian boy on the Temple Mount near the Al-Aqsa Mosque who was harmed by this soldier. And his father saw the picture in the New York Times. He was actually from Chicago and said, "That's my son. His name is Tuvia. He's Jewish." And that soldier, who actually isn't Jewish, was Druze, saved his life. And it wasn't on the Temple Mount either. And that led to an email group, Yahoo group at the time. And then that led to a website that had its impact over the years. But over the last 2 years since I joined, and my CEO, Jackie Alexander, who lives in Florida, we've made it a lot more relevant, a lot more aggressive, a lot more reaching out to young people around the world who see our stuff on Instagram and TikTok. And we've been very successful in getting a biased journalists, and Hitler and Hamas praising journalists, suspended, reassigned, or fired 12 times. We've been successful in getting corrections in the newspapers pretty much every day and in educating people around the world. When did I personally, you asked there, Eliyahu? I was interviewed by BBC. It must have been 15 years ago. And the anchor woman, Shara Hussein, who's since become a top anchor woman for BBC. She's been promoted to the top of the top since then. She made fun of the rocket attacks that were facing Israel, and she said, so few of you are dying, as if that was something that justified the attacks. And I said to her, but every single rocket could kill a dozen people, and we're not going to apologize for having anti-missile defense systems and bomb shelters. But every single one is a double war crime, fired from civilian areas at civilian areas. And just her attitude in making it seem like it's okay for Hamas to be firing rockets at Israeli civilians really bothered me back then. And it's really unfortunate that the BBC, instead of demoting her or firing her because of her lack of professionalism, has made her the rising star.
Mm-hmm.
Was that your first experience, like personally, when you dealt with this bias in the media?
I mean, there have been countless.
Yeah.
After the 2009 election in Israel, in which Netanyahu came back to power, I remember being interviewed. The other person interviewed as an expert was Noam Chomsky. And Russia Today, the Putin's channel, thought that Noam Chomsky is the expert on Israeli politics. I remember him saying, well, the reason why Netanyahu got elected is that he fights Barack Obama, and Israelis don't like black people. That was his explanation. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. So plenty of bias, and we need to be educating American news consumers to understand that in this war, the top journalists from around the world have come to the Israeli side to report because we're a democracy with freedom of the press. And in Gaza, in part because of a controversial decision by Israel not to let reporters in order to prevent them from being harmed, the reporting coming out from Gaza is from ordinary Gazans who have cell phones and cameras on their phones, and that's where their news is coming from. These people are obviously very biased. They live there, and they've been through what they've been through during this war. People should not be trusting any of the news coming out of Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Before I get to my next question, I'm curious about what you just mentioned, the fact that Israel is not letting like foreign journalists enter into Gaza, which has definitely been a big talking point. What do you personally think about that? Do you think it's been a mistake?
Can I change my mind every day?
Yeah.
Um, I really see both sides in this one.
Mm,
I mean, I'm glad that there aren't more Shireen Abu Akleh's journalists who are killed in the warfare. That the overall majority of journalists who have been killed in this war were not killed as journalists. They were killed as supporting terror, like the one who held hostages in his home.
mm.
Um, and I also understand that if you'd have professional journalists coming in, they do a lot better than your average Gazan with a cell phone.
And going off that, a lot of when I see honest reporting, a lot of what I've seen in the past few months has been kind of talking about those photo journalists who were involved in the October 7 attacks. So I've seen a lot of that getting posted. I'm curious what sort of work goes on like behind the scenes. Do you have relationships with these media outlets, and do you communicate with them sometimes and like explain to them about bias that if they're if they publish an article that's biased, like do you have contacts inside of these American outlets, and how does that kind of work?
We know people who work for all the different media outlets. Give you an example. A couple of weeks ago, there was a AP story, Associated Press read all around the world, that referred to the Golden Dome of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is gray and dirty, and the Golden Dome is the mosque next to it. And so I had to point this out. Now, I could have shamed them on social media, like you don't even know what the Al-Aqsa Mosque is. And sometimes we do that if there's a pattern of egregious errors. But this was a genuine mistake that was made by a reporter who I knew personally. And so I wrote her privately behind the scenes, and she was very appreciative of that. And they changed it right away. And so that happens every day. That we find mistakes and we help them at honest reporting, get the facts out straight. We see the reports immediately when they come on because we have alert systems and everything. And
Mm.
if we can change something immediately before other people see it, that's the best. But yeah, when they're making mistakes or show their bias day in and day out, then it's a good thing that social media exists to help them realize that they can't get away with it.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious how you kind of touched on this a little bit, but how much do you attribute this, misinformation and disinformation in the media about Israel? How much do you attribute it to anti-Semitism, and how much would you attribute it to just, kind of they don't know any better, or it's kind of just they're so used to kind of this narrative that they kind of just automatically just kind of share misinformation? How much would you attribute it to that?
Look, some of it does come from uninformed journalists coming in. A war started over here, so they flew in all their journalists from Ukraine. And they might have by then understood the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, but they sure didn't have any background over here. So, yes, there's a lot that comes from people journalists being thrown into the fire with no background and knowledge, which is why I recommend people get their news from Israeli news sources like the Jerusalem Post, where I still am a columnist, Times of Israel, ILTV, where my wife is the editor-in-chief, I-24, and not get their news from any local media outlet in America that they should really just use to get their sports and weather. But yes, some of it is anti-Semitism. Some of it is media outlets that have an agenda. Reuters, anything that gets reported from the Middle East gets edited in Qatar, and their reports are wrong day in and day out. Media outlets around the world get their news through Reuters, and people need to know that. Now, at Honest Reporting on November 8th, we questioned how did the photographers a month before get there so early that day? Were they embedded? Were they tipped off by Hamas? And we asked these questions. Little by little, more and more came out over time about how part of the Hamas's written plan was that they would use journalists to get their message out. And we found more and more Gazans who infiltrated that day, who reported for AP and Reuters and CNN and the New York Times. We found one particular guy who was a photographer for Reuters who did an Instagram Live on October 7th, where he said to the people of Gaza, you got to come in. I've been here since the beginning, and we've been taking out the men, killing the dogs, and doing whatever we want to do with the women. That vile, disgusting person could have won a Pulitzer Prize. But we at Honest Reporting highlighted that video, and we led a campaign to the Pulitzer people saying, don't give the Pulitzer to infiltrators and Hitler praisers. And the Reuters did win the Pulitzer Prize for photography. They submitted nothing from October 7th. And we were told that the Pulitzer lady said that the reason why Reuters didn't submit anything from that day was because there's this pesky media watchdog, Honest Reporting, that questioned both the physical and ethical boundaries that were crossed by media outlets around the world that day. So I encourage people to go to honestreporting.com or follow us on Instagram, X, Facebook, LinkedIn, or TikTok, and get the truth. If you're going to be on TikTok, then you might
I'm
as
not
well
on TikTok.
go. TikTok is an important fight that's going on. But TikTok is also a tremendous waste of time, college students. Don't do it.
Unfortunately,
Don't rot your brain.
unfortunately, they banned TikTok on our campus, so we can't really go on that outlet.
They did, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, I noticed when you were mentioning the Israeli news outlets that are like that you would recommend to someone kind of from outside. I know Jerusalem Post, Times of Israel, Haaretz is a big one that's consumed by American readers, like in English language. And I'm curious if it was unintentional that you mentioned that, or do you not think that that's a good source?
I run a 501c3 charity. I don't make political endorsements of candidates or media outlets that are affiliated with one end of the political map. The media outlets, I said, try to be unbiased within internal reporting, whereas Haaretz is very proud to represent the far left-wing fringe in Israel, just like Arutz Sheva would be proud to represent the right-wing fringe, and JNS, they're very proud to be right-wing. Whereas the Jerusalem Post is objective, ILTV is objective. So I don't recommend biased media internally either, even though I have wonderful friends who work at JNS and Haaretz. Do I still? Yeah, I do. Yeah.
And kind of going off that, what do you think are the most reliable outlets at covering Israel from outside?
None.
None?
No, I can't recommend any foreign media outlet that's reporting in Israel. And it's not just because I'm the executive director of Honest Reporting. I remember back when I was at Northwestern, we had a lot of visiting lecturers and everything that came in to give a talk. And usually they had them speak to the entire journalism department or the entire college. But when the foreign news editor of the Christian Science Monitor came, the journalism school decided to have only students interested in foreign reporting would meet with him. And so I was one of like 6 or 7. And after he gave his spiel about what he does, I asked the first question. I said, your business model makes no sense to me. I said to him, you guys send a journalist to Moscow for 4 years, and by the time that they understand the depth of conflicts of Russia, you send them off to China or to Cairo or to Jerusalem. And by the time they learn any Hebrew or Arabic here in Jerusalem, by the time they understand the depth of the conflict, you're sending them off to Washington. Well, that's a recipe for never having any accurate reporting. Why don't you just tune into the Jerusalem Post instead, where the people know what's going on here and live here for more than 4 years and get it? I don't think he liked my question very much, but I think I was already right back then.
Yeah, that's a really interesting insight, and makes a lot of sense how they're kind of a lot of these international correspondents, they're learning what they need to know about the each country when they are sent off there. So I think that's really interesting insight to kind of pinpoint like, hey, we should be getting these international correspondents who know the conflicts, who know the languages. So that's really a good insight there. That's all the questions that we have on our ends, but is there anything that you want our listeners to know that maybe we didn't touch on that you want to highlight?
I mean, obviously, Florida is better than other campuses in America because your administration handled things smartly, and obviously jealous of you being an alum of the university that handled things the worst for students in between the extremes of the University of Florida in being smart and professional, and Northwestern in being pathetic and shameful. I wish you guys had just a normal campus experience of where you didn't have to deal with politics, deal with having to develop your identity so quick and having to be defensive about it. So because you're stuck with the way it is right now, be proactive, be reactive about Israel within the conflict, beyond the conflict. Learn as much as you can to be able to explain what's going on. And my last bit of advice, and if you are just tuning in now and didn't hear anything from before, this is the most important thing I'm going to say is be a mensch, be a good person. Because if you're someone who people see as a good person, then they'll trust you as a source of information.
Hmm.
They'll trust what you write on social media. They'll trust what they hear from you personally, and we need more good people out there.
That's really great. I really appreciate your thoughts and your insights again into the media and Israel and how everything is kind of taking shape right now. So again, Gil, I really appreciate you joining us and talking to us today.
Thank you
Happy
so
to
much.
help, and any son of Ira Shanes is a friend of mine.
All right, guys, we really hope that you enjoyed our conversation with Gil Hoffman, the executive director of Honest Reporting. Levi, what do you think about our conversation?
It was really interesting, first to hear just about how he came from, learning journalism, studying journalism in the United States at Northwestern, very prestigious journalism school,
Mm-hmm.
and then his experience at the Jerusalem Post for so long as a senior political reporter. I think 16 years, I want to say, that he worked there. And I've known about Honest Reporting for a while. I knew about that incident that he mentioned about the incorrect headline. I can't remember what story it was at the top of my head. I mean, what newspaper it was, but with the person at the Temple Mount, the soldier at the Temple Mount who ended up being a Bedouin soldier. And it is interesting to hear about the kind of behind the scenes things, as I mentioned, that Honest Reporting is doing in this kind of arena in terms of like trying to tell journalism institutions when they're being biased, whether intentional or unintentional. And that's something I was really curious to hear about in the conversation about how much do you think, if the media is biased, how much of it is intentional and unintentional bias. So,
Yeah, and absolutely, and especially for us, both journalism students,
Mhm.
I think he was somebody who really gave a lot of great insight. Us as journalism students, he talked about his experience in school at Northwestern, arguably the top journalism school in the country.
Yeah.
And I really also loved his comparison of media and journalism between Israel and the U.S. I thought it was really interesting, his insight into the fact that he actually says that the political reporting in America is a lot more productive, is a lot more issues based than in Israel. In America, where we get a lot of, you know, slack for our reporting and fake news and stuff like that. And obviously, America is not perfect. No news organization is perfect, but it's really interesting to see just the comparisons between it I thought was very interesting as well. So I thought it was a really great interview, and I really like to thank Gil a lot for joining us.
Definitely.
Old friend of my dad's. My dad was in the same class as Gil Hoffman in high school.
Oh, no way.
At Valley Torah High School in Skokie, Illinois.
Wow.
Fun fact, my dad told me that he ran for class president against Gil
No
when
way.
they were in high school together. I don't remember if he told me he won or he lost, but definitely really interesting, and it was great to have him on our podcast. So guys, we really appreciate you guys for tuning in. Again, we want to be more consistent with the podcast, and we really want to give you guys some really great content and really great interviews every other week. So don't forget to subscribe if you're listening on YouTube, or follow us if you're listening on Spotify, if you're listening on Google, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts.
Wherever podcasts are found.
Wherever podcasts are found. We also made an Instagram account.
Yes.
Follow us on 2 Jews, 10 Opinions. And we're always going to try to post some content on there as well, just some fun stuff just like to keep you engaged and just to notify you guys when episodes are out.
Yeah.
And guys, don't forget, don't be afraid to send us a DM.
Please, yeah.
Yeah, we want to hear from you guys. If you have any suggestions for some guests that you want to see us have on our podcast, if you have any suggestions for things that you want us to discuss, we really love to hear it. We love you guys. We love our supporters, and it really means a lot to us if you subscribe, if you follow along.
Yes. All right. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank you guys. Have a great rest of your day, and stay tuned for more episodes, season 2.